My name is Blanca. I'm 23 years old. I gave my life to Jesus at the age of 16. I grew up in a Catholic home, so I remember at the age of 12 doing the first communion. And I remember going to the church and just really saying, okay, I most found about God. I most feel God in the church today. And I remember doing it and going back home, and there was no change. A little bit of my background is I grew up in a small town down in Mexico, and I was taught that Christians worship the devil. So you don't hang out with Christians for nothing in your life. You're not a friend of a Christian person. But then really, I started opening myself to a lot of sin. And one of my major sins was really alcohol. I started finding a little bit of, I will say, a little bit of freedom in a way in my brain in alcohol, because although I have great parents, I grew up with great parents, they had good values, but they weren't Christians. However, because they wanted to give their kids their best, they really didn't spend much time with me. So I remember thinking, I remember just doing my best in everything I did just to find a little bit of good job, Blanca. So I never really had that. So I had a lot of bitterness in my heart, and I remember just drinking a lot to kind of forget that, because that made me forget the fact that I didn't have that at home, and that opened myself to other things like depression. So I started taking medicine for depression because my parents really didn't know any better. So they took me to the doctor and they gave me medicine for depression, and that didn't really help a lot, but got overdosed a couple of times for drinking and taking the pills. Then I started cutting myself just to, I felt the outside pain was kind of curing the pain in the inside of not having that love at home. So, and although my parents did raise me with some values, I just started turning away from that. I just completely turned away from those values and just started embracing everything in the world. Abortion was okay with me, and although I never really had an abortion, but in my brain that was okay, as long as people was happy. And everything else in the world was okay with me. So I started embracing this very liberal mentality and this very open-minded mentality, which led me to, at some point in my life, denying the existence of God. I remember thinking, if there is so much pain and so much suffering in this world and in my heart, there must not be a God. And if there is, he doesn't care about me. Therefore, I don't care about him. So I remember just having conversations with friends, so like, I don't care about God. I really don't. I go to church because sometimes my parents went to church, so I went, but never really had any convictions, any reverence for God. So I remember coming to the States, and a friend invited me to a Christian church, and that was very different. Just the way the gospel was presented to me, that Jesus Christ died for my sins, and because he loved me, that was different. So I started coming to Victory Chapel for about 3 months, never really made a decision to serve God. It wasn't until Pastor Roman Gutierrez, he's a pastor in fellowship, came to my high school, Clark Central, and gave his testimony. And I remember thinking, well, that's pretty awesome. And he had a very rough upbringing. And so I remember thinking, my home might not be as bad, but I'm right there. I was this close to drugs, to all the things that he went through. I mean, I was already cutting myself and just opening myself to so much. And after he finished his speech at work, at school, he invited us to church. So I remember saying, I'll go. I mean, I'm already going to that church Sunday mornings, I'll go. And he gave his testimony once again, and I remember the Holy Spirit really convicted me of my sins, just really bringing me to, one, if I die right now, I won't make him my home. And two, I might not be as bad as him, but I can easily get there. So I remember going to the altar and saying, and really repenting of my sins, saying, God, I know I am a sinner. I know I have sinned against you, forgive me. And I remember just feeling God all over me. And in that moment, 2 things happened. Is that I felt God all over me. And I remember not only repenting of my sins, but that one thing that I used to proclaim, there's not a God, I really did say, God, I'm so sorry for ever denying that you exist. And the other thing is like, I felt how God said, I love you. And it wasn't the kind of love that a teenage boy will tell you on the street because they want to see how much they can get away with that, or the kind of love that you have to do this in order to get this. It was just a genuine love that I felt in my heart, that God said, I love you for who you are. And since that day on, I live for God. I remember saying as well, God, help me not to be the type of person who says, God, I want to live for you, and then walk away from the faith. So I can honestly say I've been living for God 8 years, and God is a faithful God. You know, it's biblical. God says, I will never leave you, neither forsake you. And I truly believe and have experienced that in my life, that God is a faithful God. And I look back, and it really has been just the best decision I ever made in my life. And I'm just happy to have a relationship with God.